My name is Rick Miller. I'm 56 years old, and after nearly 3 decades of marriage, I thought I understood what family loyalty meant. But nothing could have prepared me for the night my phone rang at 2 in the morning, and I learned how quickly love can turn to betrayal. Who spends $300,000 on champagne while their own mother is left shivering outside in the snow? Stay with me, because what began at that New Year's party opened a wound in my family that may never fully heal. It was just after 2 in the morning when the phone beside my bed lit up and rattled against the nightstand. I thought at first I must have been dreaming, because who in their right mind calls at that hour on New Year's Eve? But the vibration kept buzzing until I grabbed it. The name flashing on the screen made my stomach twist. Joan. Her voice came through shaky, barely recognizable. "Rick, please, you have to come. I'm outside. They left me out here." I sat up so fast the sheets tangled around my legs. "What are you talking about? Left you where?" Her breathing was uneven, like she was trying not to cry. "Aspen. Outside the resort. They threw me out, Rick. I'm freezing." For a second I thought my heart had stopped. The muffled sound of music and laughter poured through the line behind her words, mixed with a sharp crack of fireworks echoing in the mountains. Joan, who hated the cold more than anything, was standing out in it while a party roared on inside. I swung my legs to the floor, fumbling for my jeans and a flannel shirt. The clock read 2:07. I forced myself to breathe slow, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking as I grabbed my boots. I kept the phone pressed to my ear. "Joan, stay exactly where you are. Don't move. I'm coming now." She whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't know who else to call. They said I wasn't welcome anymore. Who said that? There was a pause. Then the words that landed like ice water poured down my spine. Emily and Mark. Our daughter and her husband. The 2 people Joan loved more than anyone after me. I froze for half a second, one boot on one boot, half-laced, trying to understand how those names could possibly belong in the same sentence with abandoned. "Joan, listen to me. Get as close to the building as you can, and keep the wind off you. I'm leaving right now." She tried to answer, but her teeth were chattering so hard, the words came out broken. The call dropped a second later, leaving me staring at my own reflection in the dark window phone, buzzing with the silence of no signal. I grabbed my truck keys from the counter, yanked on a jacket, and barreled out into the night. The air slapped me with the same bitter cold. I knew Joan was facing 2 hours away. The truck engine coughed before it caught headlights, cutting a path through fresh snow on the driveway. The roads out of Denver were nearly empty, only the occasional set of taillights miles ahead. I pressed harder on the gas, the heater blowing full blast against my frozen fingers. Every mile marker I passed felt like an insult, reminding me how far away she was. Memories of Emily as a little girl kept flickering in my mind, her laugh in the back seat on family trips to the mountains, the way Joan always wrapped her scarf tighter, even in mild weather. How could that same daughter, our little girl, be the one who shoved her mother outside on a night like this? The sky still shimmered with the last bursts of fireworks when I reached the highway that climbed toward Aspen. The radio crackled with reports of icy roads, but I barely heard them. All I could think of was Joan's voice, the way she said they left me, the background noise of champagne glasses clinking while she shivered. 2 hours felt like 10. I gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. I kept replaying the words she had whispered. Not welcome anymore. That wasn't anger. That was exile. At last the resort lights appeared in the distance, a golden glow against the dark mountains. The parking lot was jammed with luxury cars, some of them already dusted with snow. Music thumped from inside bass so strong I could feel it in my chest even before I cut the engine. And then I saw her. Joan was huddled against the stone wall near the side entrance, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around herself. Her jacket was too thin, her silver hair whipped by the wind. Even from across the lot, I could see her body trembling, her face pale under the harsh floodlights. I ran. Snow crunched under my boots, breath burning in my lungs. Joan lifted her head at the sound, and for a second her eyes searched us before landing on me. "I thought you wouldn't come," she whispered when I crouched in front of her. I pulled her into my arms. "You're safe now. I've got you." Her skin was like ice through the fabric of her sleeves. I lifted her to her feet, half carrying her to the truck. She collapsed into the passenger seat, and I cranked the heater to full blast. Inside, the glass windows of the resort pulsed with colored lights, shadows of people dancing champagne flutes raised. Laughter carried across the snow, sharp and cruel in my ears. Joan's voice was still broken, chattering. "They took my keys, said I didn't belong." I gripped the steering wheel so hard my hand ached. Our daughter and her husband were inside that glowing building, celebrating with their friends, while Joan sat beside me, shaking and abandoned in the snow. I pulled out of the lot of headlights, cutting through the storm, knowing this night had just split our family wide open. The highway twisted through the mountains, the storm pushing snow across the windshield faster than the wipers could clear. Joan sat silent beside me, her hands clutched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles looked white in the dim light. The heater blasted, but her body was still shaking. I kept glancing over, worried she might fade out altogether. "Are you hurt?" I asked finally, my voice lower than I intended. She shook her head, eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. "Not physically." The way she said it made something inside me tighten. I wanted to press for more, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I focused on the road, on keeping us steady through the storm. The distance between Aspen and Denver stretched endlessly. Every time the headlights caught the green of a road sign, it felt like the numbers hardly moved. 2 hours might as well have been 10. Joan pulled her jacket tighter, though I knew it wasn't helping. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke. I was standing near the patio heaters. They were laughing, passing champagne. Emily looked straight at me, Rick, and she said, "You don't belong here anymore." Then Mark grabbed my bag and tossed it at me. He told me to figure out my own way home. My grip on the wheel tightened until it hurt. The idea of our daughter saying those words with her husband standing by made my stomach twist. She looked so angry. Joan's voice cracked, like she hated me. The wipers scraped against the glass as I fought to find words. "We'll sort this out tomorrow. Right now, I just need to get you warm." We drove in silence for a while, the road climbing and dipping through the mountains. The storm had eased a little, leaving a pale glow of the moon behind the clouds. It cast a strange light on the snow, like the whole world was frozen in time. My mind wouldn't stop running. I thought about how the night had started the phone call that ripped me awake and the years before it. Emily had been our pride, our joy. She called every Sunday, brought Mark over for dinner once a month, always smiling, always polite. I kept seeing her at 10 years old, curled up on Joan's lap, whispering secrets only a mother and daughter could share. How had we gone from that to this? Joan finally leaned her head against the window, her breath fogging the glass. "You should have seen the party," she whispered. There was a pyramid of champagne glasses taller than me. They hired a DJ from Los Angeles. Fireworks shot off over the mountains. She closed her eyes, her voice faint. All that money, and they couldn't give me a ride home. The bitterness in her words was sharper than I had ever heard from her. I wanted to ask where the money had come from, how they could afford such a display. But something in her face stopped me. She looked too fragile, too close to breaking. Instead, I reached over and covered her hand with mine. Her skin was still cold. "We'll get through this," I said, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince. As the miles passed, the storm gave way to stretches of clear sky. The moonlight spread across the snow like a silver sheet. It should have been beautiful. but all I felt was dread. Every mile closer to Denver made the weight on my chest heavier. I kept thinking of what awaited us come morning. Emily, our only daughter, had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. Something had cracked in our family, and I didn't know if it could be repaired. I tightened my grip on the wheel, eyes fixed on the empty highway ahead. Joan's breathing had steadied, but I knew she wasn't asleep. She was retreating into herself the way she did when something weighed too heavy to share. The headlights caught another sign. Denver, 72 miles. I let out a slow breath, the silence between us as thick as the snow piled on the trees outside. Tomorrow would bring questions, answers I wasn't sure I wanted, and a confrontation I already dreaded. For now, all I could do was keep driving through the night, hoping the road would somehow lead us back to the family we thought we had. When we finally pulled into the driveway, the eastern sky was beginning to pale, that strange gray light that comes just before dawn, stretching across the snow. I turned off the engine, and for a long moment, neither of us moved. The heater clicked as it cooled, and the silence inside the truck was broken only by Joan's slow, uneven breaths. I got out and hurried around to her side. She tried to stand, but her legs wobbled, so I steadied her with an arm around her shoulders. She was still trembling, though the heat should have warmed her by now. I guided her inside, flipped on the kitchen light, and the familiar glow of our home felt both comforting and painfully fragile. "Sit down," I said gently, pulling out a chair. "I'll make some tea." She didn't argue. Joan lowered herself into the chair and stared at her hands, fingers twisting together like she was tying knots. I filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and leaned against the counter, studying her face. The lines looked deeper, the skin almost gray from exhaustion. I waited for her to speak, but she didn't. The kettle began to hum, filling the silence, until finally I asked the question I had been holding back all night. "Joan, why would Emily do this?" Her head jerked up. For a second I saw anger flash across her eyes, but it melted into something closer to shame. "Because she thinks I betrayed her." Steam whistled from the kettle. I poured the water into a mug and set it in front of her. She wrapped her hands around it like she needed the heat to keep from shattering. "Rick, there's something I haven't told you." My stomach tightened. I pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "Go on." She took a shaky breath. "A few years ago, after Mom died, I found papers she never mentioned. There was a cabin in Maine she bought decades ago. She left it to me along with a portfolio of stocks. It's worth a lot. Close to $1 million, maybe more." The words hit like a blow. $1 million? I searched her face, waiting for her to say she was exaggerating, but all I saw was guilt. "I didn't want it to ruin us," she whispered. "I thought if I told you you'd feel pressure or Emily would expect everything to be hers someday. So I kept it quiet." I gripped the edge of the table. "All these years you kept this from me." She flinched, but nodded. "I planned to donate it to the Children's Hospital in Denver, the one Emily volunteered at. I wanted it to be a surprise, something that would honor my mother's memory." The bitterness rose in my throat. And Emily found out. Joan nodded again, tears welling in her eyes. She was helping me sort through old files last week. She saw the deed and the appraisal. When I told her my plan, she exploded. She said I was stealing her future, that I cared more about strangers than my own family. I leaned back, running a hand over my face. The picture was starting to form jagged pieces of anger, betrayal, and silence, fitting together in the worst way. "She looked so angry tonight," Joan whispered, her voice breaking. "Like she didn't even see me as her mother anymore." The mug shook in her hands, tea rippling to the brim. I reached across the table and covered her fingers with mine. She pulled back slowly, wiping her eyes with the back of her sleeve. "I should have told you sooner. I just thought I was protecting everyone." "Protecting us by lying," I muttered, before I could stop myself. She looked down, shoulders curling inward. I stood and began pacing the kitchen, my bare feet cold against the tile. The house smelled faintly of pine from the wreath on the door, but all I could feel was the sour taste of betrayal. My wife had hidden a fortune. My daughter had discovered it, and now we were standing on the edge of something that didn't feel like a family anymore. Joan's voice came from behind me so quiet, I almost missed it. She said something else tonight. I turned. What did she say? That she knows I'm hiding more. That she's going to find out everything I've kept from her. The words lingered in the air like smoke. My pulse pounded in my ears. I wanted to demand answers, but the look on Joan's face stopped me. It wasn't just guilt anymore. It was fear. I sank back into my chair. Joan, is there more? Her silence was louder than any confession. She stared at the table, her fingers tracing the rim of the mug, eyes refusing to meet mine. I don't know if I can tell you tonight, she whispered finally. The clock on the wall ticked louder than I remembered. Outside, the first light of morning painted the snow a soft blue. I sat there watching her, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, my wife of 28 years. And I realized the storm outside wasn't half as dangerous as the one now tearing through our home. The sun crept higher, casting pale light across the kitchen floor. Joan still hadn't moved from her chair. I sat across from her, arms folded, fighting the urge to press harder. Every part of me wanted answers, but I could see she was already stretched to her breaking point. Finally, she cleared her throat, her voice rough. Rick, I didn't tell you everything last night. About the cabin, about the stocks. I nodded, waiting. She gripped the mug again as if it were the only thing anchoring her. After my mother passed, the lawyer explained there was more than just the house we sold. She had purchased a lakefront cabin in Maine decades ago under her maiden name. It was left solely to me. I didn't mention it because I thought it would complicate things. Complicate things. I repeated, my voice sharper than I meant. You're talking about nearly $1 million in property and investments. Her eyes filled with tears. I know. And that's why I thought the best thing was to keep it quiet until I knew what to do. I pushed back from the table, pacing the length of the kitchen. 28 years of marriage, and she had carried this secret alone. My chest ached with both anger and disbelief. And what exactly was your plan, Joan? To hide it forever? She shook her head quickly. No. I wanted to give it to the Children's Hospital in Denver. The one Emily used to volunteer at. I thought it would honor my mother's memory. I thought it would be beautiful. I stopped pacing and stared at her. So you were just going to give it away without a word to me, without a word to Emily? Her chin quivered. I was afraid if I told you, you'd try to stop me. And if Emily knew, she would demand it all for herself. The words stung more than I expected. You didn't trust me either. Joan pressed her hands over her face. I didn't want anyone to change my mind. I sank back into my chair, rubbing my temples. The silence between us felt like a canyon. When did Emily find out? Last week. She was helping me organize old tax papers. She found the deed and the appraisal tucked in a folder. At first, she didn't say anything. Then I explained my plan for the donation, and she erupted. I closed my eyes, picturing our daughter's face twisted in rage. Joan's voice cracked. She said I was stealing her future. She accused me of choosing strangers over her, of not caring if she and Mark struggled. I wanted to argue to defend Joan, but the truth was harder than either of us could ignore. She had hidden nearly $1 million. Emily had stumbled across it and felt betrayed. Joan's voice dropped to a whisper. She said things I can't forget. That she wished she'd never been my daughter. That I was selfish. Then Mark told me to leave, that I wasn't welcome anymore. The kettle on the stove let out a hiss as the flame died under it. I turned it off, though neither of us had touched the tea in half an hour. We sat there in the growing daylight, our silence heavy with all that had been said and all that hadn't. My mind spun with questions I didn't know how to form. Why did Joan think secrecy was protection? How could Emily turn so cruel so fast? And what role did Mark play in all this? Joan finally met my eyes. "There's more," she whispered. I stiffened. "More what?" She looked down, twisting her ring. "Emily told me last night she knew I was still hiding things. She said she would find everything, that I couldn't keep anything from her anymore." A cold knot formed in my stomach. Joan, is there more? She hesitated, her lips pressing tight. I could see the war inside her, the urge to confess, and the fear of tearing us apart further. "I can't not yet," she said finally, her voice barely audible. The clock ticked louder in the quiet kitchen. Outside, a car passed slowly on the snow-packed street, its tires crunching in the stillness. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, the weight of secrets pressing down harder than the storm had hours before. My wife had built a wall of silence. My daughter had shattered it in anger, and I was caught in the middle, unsure where my loyalty should land. When I looked back at Joan, her eyes were red, her hands trembling against the mug. She whispered again, almost to herself. "I thought I was protecting us." I reached across the table, but she didn't move. The distance between our fingers felt wider than any highway. The morning light brightened the room, chasing away the shadows, but it did nothing to soften the fear that had taken hold inside me. Joan stayed at the table, as if she were rooted there. Her shoulders slumped forward, her hands cradling the mug, even though the tea inside had long gone cold. I moved to the sink, rinsed out my own cup, and stared out the window at the street. A neighbor was scraping ice from his windshield, bundled in layers against the chill. It struck me how ordinary his morning looked compared to ours. I leaned my palms against the counter, my back tight with the weight of everything unsaid. Joan finally broke the silence. "Rick, I don't think Emily will call me again." Her words landed heavy. I turned to face her. "She will. She's angry now, but she's still our daughter." Joan shook her head slowly. "You didn't see her eyes last night. They weren't just angry. They were filled with hate." I walked back to the table and sat down across from her. I wanted to argue, to insist she was wrong, but the memory of Joan's shaking voice on the phone and the way she said Emily's name stopped me. Maybe she was right. The house was too quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the faint creak of the furnace kicking on. It all felt wrong, like our home had shifted into a place I no longer recognized. Neither of us had slept. My body ached. My mind felt frayed, but I couldn't stop replaying everything. I needed clarity, something to hold on to. Joan rubbed at her temples and whispered, "I should never have kept secrets from you." I wanted to tell her it was too late for regrets, but instead I reached for her hand. She let me hold it this time, her fingers thin and cold against mine. The sun rose higher, casting light across the kitchen walls. Hours had passed without me realizing. Joan pulled her hand back and stood. She moved slowly, as if her body carried years more than her age. "I'll lie down for a bit," she said. I watched her walk down the hall, her steps unsteady. When the bedroom door clicked shut, I stayed at the table staring at the mug she left behind. A ring of tea stained the wood underneath. I tried to close my eyes to rest, but every time I drifted, I saw Joan standing in the snow outside that resort. Her lips blue, her eyes filled with something between terror and shame. I sat back up, restless. By mid-morning, I gave up on sleep. I pulled on my coat and stepped outside. The air bit at my face, and the quiet street looked almost too peaceful. I shoveled the walkway, though it didn't need anything to push back against the helplessness clawing at me. When I came back inside, Joan was awake again, standing in the living room with her arms wrapped around herself. She had changed into warmer clothes, but her face was pale. She looked at me with eyes that carried exhaustion I couldn't fix. "Do you think she hates me enough to cut me out forever?" she asked. I took a long breath. I don't know. But I know we can't hide anymore. Secrets got us here. Her lips trembled, but she nodded. "I think she's already planning something." Mark was whispering to her last night. He had papers in his hand. I don't know what they were. The thought sent a sharp jolt through me. My jaw clenched. If they're making plans, then we'll be ready. We sat together on the couch, not touching, but close enough to feel the weight of our silence. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. The sound made us both jump. I leaned forward and grabbed it. The message was from Emily. "Dad, come to the house this afternoon, alone. Mom stays home." I stared at the words, my throat dry. Joan leaned over to read. Her face crumpled and she covered her mouth with her hand. "She doesn't even want to see me," Joan whispered. I put the phone down, my chest heavy. I could hear the echo of fireworks from last night, the laughter, the clinking glasses. I thought of Emily's voice when she was a child, calling me Daddy. And now here she was shutting her mother out completely. Joan sank back into the couch, her eyes wet. I don't know how we fix this. I didn't either. All I knew was that by this afternoon, I would be sitting across from our daughter and her husband, and whatever they had planned was going to change everything again. The hours crawled toward noon, each minute stretching longer than the last. I kept pacing the living room, glancing at the clock, listening to the hum of the furnace as if it might drown out the thoughts running circles in my head. Joan sat in her armchair by the window, twisting her wedding ring around her finger, staring out at the snow piled on the hedges. Neither of us said much, because there wasn't much left to say without reopening wounds that were already raw. Finally, I told her I needed to know more before I walked into whatever trap Emily and Mark had prepared. Joan didn't look away from the window when I spoke. "There's a drawer in the desk upstairs." "Bottom one." I kept something there. I went up the stairs, creaking under my weight. In the small study, sunlight cut across the desk, illuminating dust motes in the air. I pulled open the bottom drawer and found a manila envelope wedged against the side. My name wasn't on it, but I knew it was meant for me. Inside was a single folded letter. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable Emily's looping script. My heart kicked harder as I unfolded it. The paper was creased, the ink slightly smudged as if it had been read and handled many times. "Dad," it began. "I wouldn't be writing if we weren't desperate. Mark and I are behind on the mortgage. The bank is threatening foreclosure. We need $20,000 to catch up. I promise we'll pay it back, we just need help. Please don't tell Mom I asked. She'll think less of me." The words blurred as my eyes filled. I sat heavily in the chair, the letter shaking in my hand. The date at the top was 6 months ago. 6 months. Joan had kept this from me. She had read her daughter's plea and tucked it away in a drawer, leaving me in the dark, leaving Emily to believe her father ignored her cries. I clenched the paper, anger simmering beneath the sorrow. For years I had thought Joan's silence was harmless, just her way of keeping order. Now I saw it differently. Her secrecy wasn't protecting us. It was carving cracks through the foundation of our family. When I came downstairs, Joan turned to me. She saw the letter in my hand, and her eyes closed as if she couldn't bear the sight. "You knew," I said quietly, though the quiet was more dangerous than shouting. "You knew they were in trouble." Her hands trembled as she clutched her sweater tighter. "I didn't want you to drain our savings, Rick. We're not wealthy. We need what little we have for retirement." I held the paper up. "And instead, you let our daughter think we didn't care." Tears streaked her face. I thought she would figure it out that it was Mark's responsibility. I thought if I stayed silent, she would learn. I shook my head, words catching in my throat. She didn't learn, Joan. She got bitter. She thought you abandoned her. The letter sagged in my hand. The house felt too small, the walls pressing in around us. Joan dropped into the chair again, sobbing quietly into her hands. I stood over her, torn between wanting to comfort her and wanting to scream. By the time the clock struck 1, I had made my decision. I folded the letter back into its envelope and slipped it into my jacket pocket. If Emily wanted answers, she was going to hear the truth from me, not the version she had pieced together in anger. The drive across town felt shorter than I expected, though every red light felt like a test of my patience. Emily's neighborhood was calm, 2-story homes, lined with bare trees, a dusting of snow on every roof. I pulled into her driveway and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. The front door opened before I could knock. Emily stood there, her arms crossed, her expression guarded. Her eyes, once full of warmth whenever she saw me, were hard now. "Dad," she said flatly. "Come in." Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and something sharp, maybe the stress of too many arguments in too few days. Mark was seated at the dining table, papers spread across it like a lawyer's office. He didn't rise when I entered, just gave a curt nod as if I were an intruder, not his wife's father. Emily gestured for me to sit. I stayed standing. My chest was tight with the weight of the envelope in my pocket. "We need to talk," she said, her voice shaking slightly, though she tried to hide it. I looked at her, my only daughter, the girl I had carried on my shoulders at the county fair, the teenager who once cried on my chest after her first heartbreak. She wouldn't meet my eyes now. I pulled the envelope from my jacket and set it on the table. Her gaze flickered to it, then back to me. "What's that?" she asked, her tone cautious. I rested my hand on it. "The truth, Emily. And we're going to read it together." Her lips parted, and for a second I saw a glimmer of the child she once was. But then Mark shifted in his chair, and her jaw tightened again. The air between us felt thick, charged, as if the walls themselves knew something irreversible was about to happen. I hadn't even unfolded the paper, but already I could feel the ground shifting under our family again. Emily's eyes stayed locked on the envelope, as though it might burn a hole through the table. Mark leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest, with the smugness of someone who thought he had already won. I pulled out the letter, slowly unfolded it, and placed it where Emily could see. "This is yours," I said. "I found it in Mom's desk drawer this morning." Her brows knitted together as she reached for it. She skimmed the first few lines, her face draining of color. When she looked up at me, her eyes were wet. "You knew." "No," I said firmly. "I didn't. She never showed me." Emily's gaze flicked between me and the page. "So all this time I thought you ignored me, that you didn't care enough to help." I shook my head, the words catching in my throat. "I would never ignore you. If I had seen this, I would have driven over that very night." She pressed the letter flat with her palm, her shoulders trembling. Mark leaned forward, then tapping the stack of documents in front of him. "That doesn't change the fact that your wife hid assets. That cabin in Maine, the stocks. Emily has a right to them. We've spoken to an attorney." My blood ran hot. "You let her believe we abandoned her while you sat on this, fanning the flames." Emily flinched, but Mark didn't. He slid a sheet of paper toward me, legal language scattered across the page. "These are the options. Either Joan agrees to divide the inheritance now, or we file suit. Fraud, intentional concealment, emotional damages." I stared at him, hardly believing what I was hearing. "You'd drag your own wife's mother into court?" Mark didn't blink. "She left us no choice." Emily rubbed at her temple, the letter still in her other hand. "Dad, I don't want to fight. I just don't understand why she thought strangers deserved more than her own family. Her voice cracked, and I could hear the child she used to be. I softened just for a moment. Emily, your mother wanted to honor her mom's memory. She wasn't trying to hurt you. She was wrong to keep secrets, yes, but she thought she was doing something good. Mark cut in sharply. Good doesn't pay the mortgage. Good doesn't erase debt. Emily's hand curled tighter around the paper. Rick, we've been drowning. Maxed out credit cards, the bank threatening to take our house. And then I found out Mom was sitting on nearly $1 million. How did you expect me to react? I opened my mouth, but Mark spoke over me again, his voice cold. She needs to transfer the property and the stocks. Half to Emily, half to us. Today. I stared at him, finally understanding. This wasn't about Emily's pain. This was about his desperation. His eyes weren't filled with hurt. They were filled with calculation. Emily, I said gently, looking only at her. I know you're angry, but listen to yourself. You're letting him turn this into war. Her lips trembled. That's not fair. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. Honey, your mother may have made mistakes, but she never stopped loving you. If you think she did, it's because someone wanted you to. For a heartbeat, I saw doubt flicker across her face. Then Mark slammed his hand on the table. Enough. If she doesn't sign, we file on Monday. The room went still. I could hear the clock ticking in the kitchen, the faint hum of the fridge. Emily looked like she wanted to crawl out of her own skin. She turned away, wiping at her eyes, and whispered, I don't know what to believe anymore. I stood my chair, scraping back. Then believe this. I held up the letter. Your mother hid this from me too. She made a mistake, but not the one you think. She didn't betray you to help strangers. She betrayed me by keeping me in the dark. We're both victims of her silence. Emily froze, her shoulders rising and falling with unsteady breaths. Mark's jaw tightened, but for the first time his confidence slipped. I tucked the letter back into the envelope. I'm taking this home. And when your mother is ready, the three of us will talk like a family. Emily's eyes met mine, pleading and uncertain. Dad, please. I touched her shoulder, but she flinched, torn between me and the man sitting at her table. Mark's voice cut through the quiet, colder than before. If you walk out without an agreement, don't come back without a lawyer. I looked at him, my chest burning. Then that's what you'll get. Emily's lips parted, but no words came. I turned and walked toward the door, the envelope tucked close to my chest, leaving the sound of her muffled sobs behind me. The cold air outside hit me harder than I expected. I stood on the porch for a moment, breathing in deep, trying to steady the storm inside me. The neighborhood looked quiet and ordinary. Kids' bikes leaning against garages, wreaths still hanging on doors from Christmas. Nothing about it hinted at the battle I had just walked away from. I got in the truck and sat for a long minute staring at the steering wheel. My hands were tight on it, but I hadn't even started the engine. The envelope rested on the seat beside me like a weight I couldn't ignore. Joan's secrets, Emily's desperation, Mark's manipulation. It all pressed against me, layer upon layer. I finally turned the key and pulled away. The snow crunched under the tires, the sound louder than usual in the empty street. As I drove, I thought about the first time Emily introduced Mark to us. He had been all charm and politeness, shaking my hand with confidence, complimenting Joan's cooking. I remembered the way he slid into our family like he belonged. I hadn't wanted to admit it then, but even that night, something in his smile felt rehearsed. Back home, Joan was waiting in the living room. She rose as soon as I opened the door, searching my face. What happened? I set the envelope on the coffee table. I told her the truth. I told Emily I never saw the letter. Joan's face crumpled. Did she believe you? I sank into the couch, exhausted. She wanted to. But Mark was sitting right there, feeding her doubts, threatening lawsuits. Joan sat slowly, her hands clasped tight in her lap. I should never have hidden it. I rubbed my temples, the weight of everything pressing down harder. It isn't just the money, Joan. It's trust. Emily thinks we both abandoned her, and Mark is using that to drive her further away. Joan's eyes filled. What do we do? I looked at the envelope, at Emily's handwriting across the front. We fight for her. Not with lawyers, not with anger, but with truth. Joan leaned back, closing her eyes. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "You don't know the half of what he's done." I turned toward her sharply. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, twisting her ring. After Emily married him, I noticed things. Credit card bills in her name with charges she couldn't explain. Withdrawals from their joint account, she brushed it off. Said Mark was just handling finances. But then I found a notice from his old job in Portland. He was forced out. Not laid off, Rick. Forced out for taking company money. I stared at her, my breath caught. Why didn't you tell me this before? Her eyes glistened. Because I hoped I was wrong. Because I didn't want to ruin Emily's marriage. I stood and began pacing the room, my pulse pounding. He's been digging this hole for years, and now he wants to bury us in it. Joan wiped her cheeks, her voice trembling. Emily doesn't see it. She thinks he's her protector. I stopped at the window, looking out at the snow that glittered under the afternoon sun. My reflection stared back at me, tired and angry. We can't let him win. Joan nodded, but her shoulders sagged. She looked smaller somehow, as if the weight of her silence had finally broken her down. That night, sleep didn't come. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind scrape against the house. Every creak of the wood, every gust outside felt like a warning. I thought of Emily, lying beside Mark, believing his lies, thinking her parents had betrayed her. I thought of Joan beside me, burdened by secrets that had shattered us. At dawn, I got up, unable to stand the stillness any longer. I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the envelope still in front of me. The ink of Emily's letter seemed darker in the early light, like the words themselves had grown heavier overnight. I knew then that this wasn't only about property or money. It was about a man who had wormed his way into my daughter's trust and turned her against us. And if we didn't find a way to expose him, we would lose her for good. Joan came in quietly, her robe pulled tight around her. She sat across from me, her eyes swollen from another night without rest. "Rick, we need help." I nodded slowly. "Yes. But not the kind Mark expects." Her gaze met mine, uncertain, but hopeful. "Who?" I sipped my coffee, thinking of the people we still trusted, a lawyer who had helped me with my father's estate years ago, a friend of mine from church whose son worked in finance. We weren't alone, not yet. I pushed the envelope toward her. "This is where we start." She placed her hand on top of it, her fingers trembling. For the first time in days, I saw a spark of something in her eyes. Not relief, not peace, but determination. The silence stretched between us, not empty this time, but charged with the promise of what we would have to face. Outside, the snow kept falling, quiet and relentless, covering everything it touched. By mid-morning, the streets in our neighborhood were slowly coming to life. I shoveled the walk again, mostly to burn nervous energy, and noticed Evelyn, our neighbor from 2 doors down, brushing snow off her porch rail. She lifted a hand in greeting, then hesitated, as if debating whether to say something. I walked over, leaning on the shovel handle. "Rough weather," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. She gave me a look, sharp and curious. "Weather's one thing. That party up in Aspen was another." My chest tightened. "You heard about that?" She leaned closer, her breath puffing white in the cold. "Rick, everybody's talking about it." $300,000 on champagne fireworks you could see from halfway across the valley. But that's not what has folks buzzing. I felt my grip tighten on the shovel. What then? Evelyn lowered her voice. I was up in Aspen visiting my sister that night. Her condo overlooks the resort parking lot. I saw Mark out there arguing with some man I didn't recognize, looked heated. I straightened, my pulse jumping. Did you hear what it was about? She shook her head. Too far to catch words. But it ended with Mark shoving the guy, then the man, jabbing a finger in his face like he was warning him. Then they both stormed off in different directions. I swallowed hard, images racing in my mind. Mark fighting with a stranger, while inside champagne towers glittered and music blasted. Joan freezing outside the same walls. Evelyn touched my arm gently. I don't know what your family's caught up in, Rick, but something about that man gave me chills. Tall, heavy coat, walked like someone used to getting his way. I thanked her and walked back to my yard, the shovel heavy in my hands. My mind churned. Who was the man, and what business did he have with Mark? Inside, Joan was on the phone with her sister, her voice low. When she hung up, I told her what Evelyn had seen. She pressed her lips tight, eyes darkening. That has to be one of his creditors. I've suspected for a while. I rubbed my jaw, anger flaring again. He's dragging Emily deeper into this, using her trust to shield himself. Joan sat on the edge of the couch, wringing her hands. If people are noticing, it won't stay quiet for long. The truth was already seeping through the cracks. Aspen's rich and restless gossip traveled fast, and Mark had left a trail of arrogance too loud to ignore. That afternoon, I drove to the store for groceries, but even there, the whispers followed. Two men near the deli counter were talking in low voices, one shaking his head. That guy spent like a king at the resort, then stiffed the caterer on half the bill. Said his father-in-law would cover it. My hands froze on the cart handle. Father-in-law. By the time I got home, my head throbbed with rage. I told Joan what I'd overheard. Her eyes widened, then narrowed in fury. He's using your name, Rick. The room seemed to close in on me. It wasn't enough that he poisoned Emily against us. Now he was staking claims in my name, making me look like I was complicit. Joan's voice broke. If the neighbors know, if creditors know, Emily is going to find out the worst way. I sat heavily, the weight of it pressing me into the cushions. We had been caught in lies of our own, but this was different. This was fraud, wearing our family's face. As dusk fell, Evelyn knocked on our door with a plate of cookies, her way of softening hard truths. She didn't stay long, but before she left, she said quietly, Rick, people are starting to wonder if you knew about all this. Her words hung in the air long after the door shut. Joan leaned against the wall, her hand over her mouth. They think it's you. I dropped my head into my hands. The walls of our home felt less like protection and more like a cage. If Mark had dragged my name into his mess, I knew it was only a matter of time before the storm reached us full force. The call came just after sunrise the next morning while I was nursing my second cup of coffee. A man's voice, clipped and cold, asked for Richard Miller. When I said it was me, he paused just long enough to make my skin crawl before saying he expected payment for services rendered to my son-in-law. I told him he had the wrong person, but he chuckled. Wrong person. You were named as the guarantor, Mr. Miller. That debt is yours now. $30,000. Paid by Friday or things get unpleasant. The line went dead before I could respond. My hand shook as I set the phone down. Joan was at the sink drying a plate, her eyes locked on me. Who was that? A collector? He says Mark used my name. Her shoulders slumped as if the last bit of strength had been pulled out of her. Rick, if they're calling you directly, this isn't just gossip anymore. I grabbed my coat and keys. I need to see Emily. The drive to their house felt longer than it should have, each mile a reminder of how far we had drifted from our daughter. When she opened the door, she looked like she hadn't slept. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, her hair pulled back in a messy knot. "Dad, what are you doing here? We need to talk. Now." Inside, Mark sat at the dining table, his laptop open, papers scattered across the surface. He didn't even look up. I closed the door behind me. "A collector called me this morning, used my name." Emily's head snapped toward him. "Mark." Finally, he looked up, eyes sharp. "Calm down, Rick. It's just business." "Business. You forged my name. You dragged me into your mess." Emily's voice trembled. "Tell me he's lying." Mark stood smoothing his shirt as if he were in control. "It's complicated, Em. I needed collateral. Rick has assets, a house, credibility. It was temporary." Her voice rose, breaking. "You put my father on the hook for $30,000 without even asking him." I stepped closer, fury boiling in my chest. "You left my wife freezing outside a gas station after blowing 300 grand on champagne, and now you're selling my name to pay for it." Emily's eyes filled with tears darting between us. "Mark, how could you?" He reached for her hand, but she pulled back. "Em, everything I've done was for us. To keep our lifestyle. To make sure we stayed respected." "Respected?" She shook her head violently. "Everyone is talking about you, about us. Respect is gone." I pulled an envelope from my coat pocket, the court documents Joan had gathered about his debts. I tossed them on the table. "These say otherwise. Restitution payments, gambling losses, fraud investigations." Mark's face flushed, then hardened. "You went digging. I didn't have to dig far. It's all public record." Emily picked up the papers with trembling hands, her lips moving as she scanned the lines. Her breath hitched. "This is true." Mark reached for the documents, but she held them back. "Answer me. Is this true?" His silence was enough. She dropped the envelope on the table like it burned her. "You've been lying to me for years." He stepped toward her, his voice softer. "I protected you from the stress. You couldn't have handled it." Her shoulders stiffened. "Don't you dare talk to me like I'm a child." The air in the room pulsed with tension, every second stretching tighter. Mark's jaw clenched. "If you walk away now, you'll lose everything." That money was going to secure our future. Emily's voice cracked, but it carried more strength than I'd heard from her in months. "I'd rather have nothing than live with lies." I placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "You're not losing everything, Emily. You still have family." Mark's eyes burned into me, hatred unmasked. "You think you've won, old man? This isn't over." I met his glare. "It is over, Mark. You dragged my name into this. Now it's mine to finish." Emily crumpled into a chair, burying her face in her hands. I wanted to comfort her, to promise everything would be okay, but I knew better. This was only the beginning. Mark's debts, his threats, his arrogance, they weren't going to disappear with one confrontation. When I left their house, the winter sun was barely breaking through the clouds. My breath hung in the air as I walked to the truck. I had proof of his crimes, and Emily finally knew the truth. But I also had a deadline, $30,000 by Friday. And I had no doubt Mark would do everything in his power to make sure I was the one who paid it. That night, I barely slept, pacing the living room with the court papers spread across the coffee table. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that collector's voice again, smooth and threatening, reminding me of the deadline. Joan sat in the recliner, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes following me as if she were afraid I might vanish too. "We need help, Rick," she finally said, her voice steady despite the fear in it. "You can't carry this alone." I stopped pacing. "What are you suggesting?" "A lawyer, a real one. Not just me digging through public records." If Mark forged your name, if he tied you to his debts, we need someone who can fight back legally. I nodded slowly. I already called Dan Harris this morning. You remember him from church. He specializes in financial fraud cases. He said he could meet us tomorrow. Relief flickered across her face. Then, we go. The next afternoon, we sat across from Dan in his office downtown. He flipped through the papers with practiced hands, his brow furrowing. He whistled under his breath when he reached the signed guarantee. If this is real, Rick, you're in serious trouble. It's not real, I said firmly. That signature isn't mine. Then it's forgery. He leaned back, tapping his pen against the file. Which means you have leverage. But you need evidence that Mark presented this as legitimate. Joan leaned forward. Evidence like the collector's call. Dan nodded. Exactly. Recordings, texts, emails. Anything that shows he misrepresented you as guarantor. If we build a case, not only can we clear your name, but we can turn the tables on him. Turn the tables. The phrase lit a fire in my chest. For weeks, I'd been reacting, scrambling, watching Mark dismantle my family. The idea of going on offense felt like a lifeline. When we left Dan's office, Joan slipped her hand into mine. For the first time since that night at the gas station, I saw a spark of hope in her eyes. Back home, we didn't have to wait long. Mark called just after dinner, his tone oily with false charm. Rick, we need to talk about Friday. I know you've heard from some people. They get aggressive, but it's nothing you can't handle. I pressed the speaker button so Joan could hear. I'm not paying your debts, Mark. There was a pause, then a laugh. This isn't about what you want, Rick. Your name's already on the papers. If you don't step up, they'll come for you, not me. Joan's hand tightened around mine. I forced my voice to stay calm. If you're so sure, send me a copy of the contract. I want to see it myself. He hesitated, then said he'd email it. A minute later, Joan's laptop chimed. We opened the file, and there it was, my name scrawled across the bottom of a guarantee agreement. My stomach turned at the sight, but Joan whispered, "Got you." We recorded the whole call, proof that he admitted to using my name. The next day, I met Dan again and handed him the recording. His eyes gleamed. This is exactly what we need. We'll file a motion to protect you, and we'll notify the authorities about the forgery. Rick, this could not only clear your name, but also put Mark in serious legal jeopardy. Driving home, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. But that weight came crashing back when I pulled into our driveway and saw Emily's car already parked there. She was sitting on the porch steps, her arms wrapped around herself. Dad, she said as I got out, her voice hoarse. Mark told me you're trying to ruin him. I sat beside her, the cold biting through my coat. Sweetheart, he's ruining himself. He forged my signature. He dragged me into debts I never agreed to. Her eyes searched mine, desperate, conflicted. He says you're exaggerating, that you've always hated him. Joan came out then, holding the printouts of the fake contract. Emily, look at this. Look at your father's signature. It doesn't even match. Emily stared at the page, her lips trembling. He said it was just paperwork. Temporary. It's fraud, Emily, I said gently. And it's going to destroy us if we don't stop him. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. I don't know who to believe anymore. Joan crouched in front of her. Believe what you see, not what he says. Emily lifted her head, eyes wet, and whispered, If this goes public, our name will be ruined. Our name, I corrected softly. Mark already ruined his. You still have a chance to stand with us, not against us. She didn't answer, but she didn't leave either. That was something. That night, Joan and I sat at the kitchen table long after Emily had gone upstairs to rest. The snow tapped lightly against the windows, almost gentle now. But I knew better. The storm hadn't passed. It was circling, waiting for its moment. Joan reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. "You think Dan can stop this?" I stared at the forged signature, bold and ugly, on the page. "If he can't, then I will." The determination in my voice surprised even me. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to Mark's chaos. I was ready to fight back to take control. But I also knew fights like this rarely ended clean. The closer I got to exposing him, the more dangerous he would become. And if Emily chose to defend him to the bitter end, I might lose my daughter for good. The hearing was scheduled on a gray Friday morning, the kind where the clouds hang low, as if they already know trouble is coming. Joan and I arrived early, sitting stiff in the wooden benches while Dan shuffled papers beside us. My heart pounded in my chest, not from fear of the judge, but from the thought of seeing my daughter walk in on Mark's arm. When they entered, Emily's eyes darted to me, wide and uncertain, while Mark strode in like he owned the room. His suit was too sharp, his grin too smug. He glanced my way with that look of defiance I had come to hate, as if daring me to speak the truth out loud. The judge called the session to order. Dan presented the forged contract first, laying it carefully on the bench. Then he pressed play on the recording of Mark's call. The room filled with his oily voice, casually admitting to using my name as collateral. I kept my eyes on Emily the whole time, and I saw her flinch at every word. Mark shifted in his seat, trying to keep his composure, but his jaw tightened as the evidence stacked higher. When it was his turn to speak, he leaned forward and spun the same story I had heard too many times, painting himself as a victim of bad luck. A man forced into desperate choices. He even dared to say I had given verbal consent. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Do you have proof of that?" Silence. Dan rose again, his voice firm. "What you've just heard is not bad luck, it is fraud. My client did not sign this contract. His name was stolen. His reputation was used without his knowledge." The gavel struck lightly, enough to end the charade. The judge ordered the contract void, directed an investigation into Mark's activities, and most importantly, declared that I bore no liability for his debts. The relief that swept through me was so strong, I nearly sagged against Joan. But the victory was bitter too. I glanced at Emily, who sat frozen, her eyes fixed on Mark as though she was only now seeing him clearly. Tears welled as she whispered something I couldn't hear. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Outside the courthouse, the cold air hit me like a blessing. Joan squeezed my arm, her face tight with exhaustion, but lit with something like hope. Emily lingered by the steps, torn between us and him. For a moment I thought she would leave with Mark, but then she turned and walked slowly toward us. "Dad," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." I pulled her into my arms, holding her like I had when she was a little girl. "You don't need to apologize, sweetheart. You just need to come home." She clung to me, sobbing into my coat. Over her shoulder, I saw Mark, glaring but powerless. He stormed off down the street, his shoulders hunched, his empire of lies finally cracking around him. The weeks that followed weren't easy. Investigators dug deeper into Mark's finances, uncovering layers of gambling debts and false accounts. He fought as I knew he would, but with every step the walls closed in tighter. Eventually, the calls from creditors stopped coming to me. They went to him where they belonged. At home, Emily stayed with us for a while, quiet and broken, but slowly beginning to heal. Joan cooked her favorite meals, and I sat with her at the kitchen table late into the night, listening more than I spoke. One evening, she looked at me through red eyes and whispered, "I almost lost everything because I trusted the wrong person." I shook my head. "No, Emily. You almost lost everything because someone you loved betrayed that trust. There's a difference." Spring finally melted the snow, and with it the sharpest edges of our pain. Joan and I watched Emily begin to rebuild. She found part-time work at a local clinic, started seeing old friends again, and smiled for the first time in months. It wasn't the carefree smile of the girl I raised, but it was real, and it was enough. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip low, Joan leaned her head against my shoulder. "You think this is the end of it?" I looked out at the quiet street, the houses lined with fresh blooms, and thought about the battles behind us. "Maybe not the end," I said softly, "but it's the beginning of something better." She nodded, and for the first time in a long while, I believed it. Looking back now, I know revenge didn't come in the form of payback or punishment. It came in the form of truth. It came in watching lies collapse under their own weight, and standing tall when someone tried to drag us down, in holding on to family, even when it felt like it was slipping away. And it came in seeing my daughter walk away from the man who nearly destroyed her, choosing instead to stand beside the parents who had never stopped loving her. If you've stayed with me through this story, I want to thank you. Stories like mine are not just about betrayal. They're about strength, about finding justice. When it feels impossible, about holding on to family. When everything tries to pull it apart. If you've ever faced something similar, I'd love to hear your story too. Share it in the comments, and if this journey meant something to you, stay with this channel for more. Because sometimes the hardest battles bring out the truest victories.